Hello everybody, ChickenBrad here today, and I wanted to show you a game that I played a little while ago. This was a 60-minute game 60, played online, and I wanted to show you, well, for me, how much fun it can be to play in a closed position, just looking for a technical win when you have really an advantage and your opponent has no counterplay. I used to enjoy a lot of tactical positions, specifically playing blitz and that, where like a sacrifice comes seemingly out of nowhere, and just the whole look of horror on your opponent's face when there's nothing they can do about it is priceless. But sometimes it can be a lot more fun to, instead of winning quickly and swiftly, to just kind of squeeze them over 30 or 40 moves. And that's kind of what happens here. So I just wanted to present that game. So I was playing the white pieces, and I started off as usual with e4. And my opponent plays the Alekhine defense, knight f6. I'm not going to go too in detail about the opening, one, because I don't really know the theory behind the opening, and two, because it's not really too important in this game. Knight c3, and I decided to do something a little different. e6 was played, and I went for d4 here. Not sure if this is the best move in the position. Bishop b4 was played, which was annoying at first, but I decided to just go ahead and respond with a3 because I figured if it takes and takes, I can play queen out to the g4 square, hitting both the pawn and the knight that would be on e4, and that looked pretty annoying for my opponent. So he doesn't go for that. He instead plays bishop a5, play b4, kicking the piece again. I want to really try and gain some space here. Bishop back to b6, and now e5 was played. Knight comes to d5, which is really the only sensible place for it to go. Knight takes d, he takes d, and he's got this kind of annoying double pawn, which was kind of a problem for him in the game. Knight f3 was played, supporting d4, and d6 now to try and sort out his double pawn and also open up space for his light squared bishop. Bishop g5 here, pretty much forcing the queen to move and keeping the bishop from coming out along that diagonal for the time being. Obviously you can play this sort of variation, but then I'm just going to be really annoying with this pawn here. And his king's going to have a really tough game. So he didn't go for that. Queen d7 was played, which is what I pretty much counted on. And here I played a move which is probably not the most accurate move. I should probably try and get my king safe, but instead I played a4, which the immediate threat of a5, just winning the bishop, and also maybe some kind of pin idea here. a6 was played, freeing up space. I played c4 now. I guess I decided as he was going to lose this double pawn anyway, and I might as well try and bring the bishop to an active square and also sort out my own backwards pawn. But he doesn't take, he instead castles, which I think is a pretty good move. And now I played a5. After bishop a7, I went ahead and played c5, which I realized that now if he tries to either advance here or take, he's going to have a lot of problems developing all of his queenside pieces. So I kind of like this, and this bishop is actually, this is the last move it's going to make pretty much during the entire game. Knight c6 was played, which is pretty annoying for me. This is a really good piece right here, actually, because both these pawns need to be defended by my other pieces. So queen b3, development move, and also developing the pawn on b4. And now my opponent continues with queen g4. Not so sure about this move. I guess the queen has to do something, and or at least he has to try and develop the rest of his pieces. So I went ahead with bishop back to e3, just once again adding another defender here to the pawn on d4. Bishop e6 was played, which prevents me from picking this pawn off at some point, and also develops the bishop. Another good move. I decided to play h3 here, just kind of kicking the queen off this area. Mind you, it can go to, oops, it can come to the e4 square here, but that would just result in my bishop moving with tempo and actually That would be winning the queen even, I believe. So, queen retreats now. Bishop e2, which opens up possibilities for a discovered attack on the queen. And now d takes e5, which, because of this discovered attack, unfortunately, this is probably the most critical move that lost the game for black. I'm not sure what I could recommend being a whole lot better. Maybe if he wants to take, just taking on c5 and then something like this, maybe even a pawn sacrifice at some point, just to try and free up his position is probably recommended, especially since my king's still in the center for now. But this move causes problems, because after knight takes e5, queen has to move, and after queen moves, I'm going to take the knight on c6, which at the time was by far black's best piece. And the only way to recapture is b takes c, and now we have a prisoner in this bishop. The only two squares it can come to, or the only three squares it can come to are these ones. I suppose it can always sacrifice here, but it's actually blocked in by its own pawn on c7. So at this point, and like I like to always in my videos try and make points for newer players, since they usually probably won't have a lot of educational content for advanced players. My plan here as white is pretty clear. If I can keep this bishop trapped, I get to play the rest of the game pretty much a piece up. So my goal is now just to simply trade off the rest of the pieces and try to win an endgame. So here I played bishop takes a6, which why not? And the pawn is hanging, and now I have a potential very dangerous pass pawn on the a file. Rook a to b8. So this pawn could come under fire, and here I played bishop to d3, kicking the queen. And I have to be very careful here because once again, I don't want to give this bishop any opportunity to come back into the game with any kind of advantage or even counterplay, if I can help it. Queen moves to f6, and here I castled. And I believe this is actually a blunder in retrospect, but we'll get into that after the next move. Rook f to d8 was played. Not sure the purpose of this move, but after he played this, I realized that there was a pretty terrible tactic that could have played on the last move. And here I played queen to a3, which looks like a strange move, but I'll show you the purpose of that. Let's just say, going back one move, let's say after castles here, we'll do a new variation. Bishop takes. Obviously I can't take with this pawn here, because if I did, the queen's just dropping to this rook. And if I decide to capture this way, after the bishop moves up, my queen's got to find a new place to go and also defend this pawn, so something like that. And then, well, my position's certainly not as good as it, well, he's obviously not going to do that, but my position's certainly not as good as it was a little bit earlier. So maybe this is still winning for white, but I definitely didn't want to allow him to free up that bishop, and that looked pretty horrible for me at the time. So queen to a3 was played, and now queen to h4, another queen move. And I think the idea behind this move was to sacrifice on h3, and then with that, black's threatening a number of things. First off, obviously the threat of just perpetual check, and not to mention maybe worse things in some variations. So I spent some time trying to decide how I wanted to defend against this exactly, and it's not really so easy to get my pieces into action. I actually wanted to play something like just bishop back here, which would have been kind of interesting, because if takes, I have this move here, which opens up, well, I don't really have that move because the queen's defending it, but I had ideas of that. So in this position, I tried to find a number of different options to defend against that bishop sacrifice, and suddenly I had a bit of an epiphany, and I thought, well, what would Steinitz do? And so I played king h2. Oops, excuse me there. Which, well, like he says, the king can defend itself, and I think that's actually a pretty good move in this situation. g5 was played, of course, and still a little worried. Not sure this is the best way to defend in the more accurate way. I was looking for a way to counterattack while defending, but like I said, if I can just get the pieces traded off here without black getting any significant advantage, I can still win. Played rook h1 with ideas that if this bishop came down here, I would simply just retreat and it'd be fine. So f5 was played first, which I think is a bit of an inaccuracy because it actually, in my opinion, makes it slightly easier to defend. And g3 is played now because this wasn't possible before, but now that the scope of the bishop is being blocked, I can do this. So queen has to move, queen h6, and now king g2, moving the king out of the way here. f4 was played. Bishop comes back to d2. Rook f8. I think better would have been just to open up the position, although this potentially would have opened threats against the black king as well. It's probably his best shot at some counterplay, but that wasn't played. Rook f8, and this allows me to just kind of lock up the position with g4. And as you can see now, the queen isn't very well placed either. So if we just look at the piece harmony, obviously I think white's pieces are a lot better. I guess my queen isn't so well placed, but I'm going to try and sort that out as soon as possible. Rook b to e8. Just putting the rook on an open file, why not? And now I played f3, just continuing to lock up the position. Back here, I considered black playing the move f3 himself, but I figured I could just bring my king to g3, and since there's an absence of the dark square bishop, and the only squares to really get at the king here are covered. Although I guess immediately that would have just lost to this move, so maybe a good thing that didn't happen. So after playing f3, I was pretty content because it looks like my defending problems are all but sorted out, and I just have to find a way to get the pieces off the board. So he continues with bishop d7, just opening up scope for his rook. I played rook a to e1, and he plays queen to g7, attacking this pawn here. Played rook takes e8, rook takes e8, and now queen b2, just keeping hold of these pawns. Note I also had the option to defend with the bishop, but I didn't like allowing any infiltration into my position. So I played the queen to b2, and even though this ties the queen down to defending pawns, which you typically don't want, I thought, well, that's only temporary. Queen comes to f7 now. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of this move was. I thought maybe it was just to kind of prevent my own bishop from coming into the position. So now I play rook e1. Notice the rook pretty much has to take here, because if he doesn't, let's just say he plays another move like, just for example, he moves the king. After I play the rook to e5, he's got some serious problems. Even if he takes here, this pawn's going to be kind of a menace. And not sure I would have even done that, but I would have definitely given some consideration into it. But instead he just goes ahead and he takes on e1. I recaptured the bishop. Queen comes into e6, and he spent a lot of time thinking in these past few moves on how to proceed, and it allowed me to actually find a forced win, so I was pretty happy already in this situation. So my plan here to get the pieces off was working. Queen to e2, queens come off, and I think he was hoping for a draw in this situation, but unfortunately a draw is impossible. So if you want to kind of take some time and pause the video and kind of consider how you would wrap up this position as white, because yes, it is winning, but it's not so obvious perhaps how to finish it. So you can go ahead and do that now if you want. Okay, so the first thing I think we need to do, that we need to see, well, for one, if there's a lot of pawns on the board, where potential pawn breaks are. Obviously, all these pawns are locked up, which accounts for all the black pawns except the one on the H file. So the only pawn break black has is to come here, and well, it doesn't really accomplish anything, because if takes, I can just retake, and if it advances, well, it just locks up the queen side, or the king side, excuse me, and that's perfectly fine. The next thing we should consider are my own pawn breaks. Now, this pawn obviously can come in, but once again, that doesn't really do anything. It can be met by the same thing that we just talked about. However, I do have potential pawn breaks on the queen side, and while they can't be done, anything can be done about that immediately, because this bishop is both blocking the A pawn and has got a hold of the B6 square. I need to reroute my king over there in order to make that happen. The third thing we need to look at is ways that my opponent and I can infiltrate into each other's position. Obviously this bishop isn't going anywhere, and my bishop can't really get out either. It's blocked in by my own pawns. So it's, in a sense, a bad bishop, but it's not. And we'll get to that in a minute. And the only way the my opponent's light squared bishop can get into the position is by kind of rerouting down here and maybe attacking one of these pawns. So that can happen, but it's quite a few moves away. And my own bishop, of course, my own light squared bishop can do kind of the same thing, but it can only really target this pawn right away. And by taking that pawn, I would open up the dark squared bishop, so I don't really want to do that unless I know the win is coming shortly after. So finally, we need to see if the king can possibly get into the position. And the black king can only get into the position via this square here on b5. And that would take a total of at least 8 moves, which would certainly give me plenty of time to reroute my own king over to defend this key square. And also I can't get my own king into the black position actually at all. So in a sense, one I might actually be thinking that black is better since his king can infiltrate my position, but it's not. Now in the actual game I had considered this. However, going back on it, I clearly didn't pick the best technical way to execute it, but fortunately that's not so important in an endgame. In a chess endgame, either the position's won and you manage to win it, or it's not. It's nice to play as technically sound as possible, but really it's not like some middle game tactic or anything where one variation leaves you in slightly better position. Either it's winning or it's not. So the key is only to find the win, and I was just trying to do it, allowing as little counterplay as possible. So King G7 was played, and now Bishop D3, which is an important move. Like we said before, this is the only way for the light square bishop to infiltrate into the position. And just going back, let's just consider for a minute that the light square did maneuver around and try to come into come into the black position. What would you play here? So in order to win this position, I can simply take off the bishop, and after the king retakes, remember there's no pawn breaks on this side, and there's no way for the king to get into the position. So it's really just a race to get in over here. However, this is actually, I'm not so concerned with this pawn break at this time. What I am concerned about is using my own king in order to decoy the black king. And in order to do that, well, first, it's black's turn here. Let's say the black comes over to defend. First thing I need to do here is move my h-pawn, and obviously black doesn't want to take because that's going to give me, well, not a pass pawn, but it's going to disconnect his pawns, dropping the other pawn here on f4. So he'll support, and after captures, I can just come over here, and it doesn't really matter what happens, where the king goes. After takes, I can just sack the bishop, and there's no way for the black king to get back in time to stop one of these pawns from promoting. And furthermore, if let's say he doesn't come over here, then, well, like we said, I have pawn breaks here, and I can infiltrate into the black position. So that's winning in that case. Alright, so back to the game continuation. And here bishop e8 was played, and I went ahead and played h4 just to, like I said, sort out possible pawn breaks here on the king side and lock it up. He responded with h6, h takes g5, h takes g5, and notice I could have just advanced that pawn and locked up, but I wanted to create the possibility for that sacrifice, making a pass pawn. So this was an important capture there. And also, there's still no way for black's pieces to infiltrate. So now I start my journey, king f2, king f6, king e2, and here I decided to play, bishop b8, and now I decided to play bishop f5, which, like I said, that first variation I saw was slightly similar than the game, or simpler than the game continuation. So I wanted to kind of provoke a bishop exchange here, and also it's more difficult to infiltrate into the black position with the light square bishop still on, so I really wanted to try and get them off. Bishop a7, as you can see, black really doesn't have any moves here. King d3, bishop back to b8, king c3, and now the king realizes he needs to get over. And fortunately, my light square bishop is actually keeping the king off the queen side, but in order to infiltrate my own king in, I need to pick off this pawn here on c6, and I can't do that with the light square bishop protecting it. So king b3, king back to f6, king a4, bishop a7, and now I played my own bishop up to c8. So the idea with this move was to go ahead and reroute my bishop. Let's say he continues with a normal move like king to g7 to the b7 square, indirectly hitting this pawn here on d5. Notice I can't do it with my bishop here on the e6 square. So if he continues king f6, bishop to d2, just kind of making the bishop slightly more active because I may need to sacrifice it at some point. King e6, a6, which is a very important move because I want to go ahead and make this advance, but I don't want him capturing with check. King f6, king a5, king e6, and now finally b5. And it doesn't really matter if he takes here or not. Taking is the best move. Now I go ahead with c6, blocking scope of the light square bishop off this pawn, and after he'll try to bring his king in, of course. King takes b5. This is just a sample variation. I'm not sure this is best play, but king e6, bishop a5, and he can try and defend with bishop b8, but that doesn't really matter because after bishop takes c7, he's not really doing anything constructive in this position. So that's kind of what I was going for by playing my bishop up to c8, but he surprised me a little bit with his own move, bishop to g6, and I actually didn't even consider this. I don't know why, because it's what I kind of defended against earlier, and I was initially extremely worried about this because, well, it allows, like we talked about before, white to infiltrate, or black to infiltrate my position, and not only does he do that, but he can do it with check. And I thought, oh no, I just turned a winning position into a potentially losing one that quickly. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, I actually can just take this bishop off right now. I went ahead and played bishop to f5, and I kind of decided, alright, bishops, you've done your job, and I don't really need you anymore in this game. Thanks for coming. So bishop takes f5, and I think he thought he was winning here. G takes f5, king takes f5, and now I went ahead with my plan, b5. C takes b, king takes b, g4, f takes g4, king takes g4. I bring my king in to win these pawns. He plays f3, and for some reason I had only considered the move bishop back to b8 here. I don't know why, but that's the move I was expecting. So I grabbed on d5. It would have been better, obviously, to grab on c7, but it doesn't really matter. King h3, king back to c6, king g2. I grab on c7, king to f1, back to f4, staying on that same diagonal. King e2, and I just look to take off this bishop. Why not? Bishop f2, and after I take on f2, well, he played one more move and then quickly resigned. So I was pretty proud with that game, just kind of keeping my opponent's counterplay at a minimum, and then just finding a kind of a technical win at the end when I was originally not so sure I was going to even be able to win with the advantage of having his bishop in jail. But I did, and pretty happy about that. I'm not going to look at this game with an engine at any point because I have a feeling an engine might have been able to chop me to bits even with his bishop trapped. But that's not really, doesn't really matter so much because I obviously wasn't playing a 3000 rated player. I was playing a player near my own skill level. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.